Welcome to Decrypt, Asia's first blockchain and cryptocurrency podcast. I'm your host, Tushar. Each week, we take a deep dive into the Asian blockchain scene with investors, technologists, and industry insiders. Go to decrypt.asia to subscribe to our newsletter and follow us on Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, and Telegram to join in the discussions. Welcome to the show, Edgar.
Thanks, Tushar. Thanks for having me here.
Before we jump into Hashgraph, let's set the context a little bit, starting with your introduction and background. You've had a very interesting career from what I could tell. Could you tell us a little bit more about how you ended up as Hedera Hashgraph's Asia head?
Yeah, sure. So I grew up in Singapore, then after my national service, went to Carnegie Mellon for my undergrad. And after that, worked at one of the top investment banks as a bond trader. I was there for about 7 years. And I left the financial services industry in 2010. And one of the things I did was I spent about 2 years in West Africa, in Ghana, building up a nonprofit. And then, since 2012, I've been investing and advising early stage tech companies. I've been looking at the DLT space for about 2.5 years now from an investor standpoint. Was very excited about the technology or about the potential of the space, but saw a lot of limitations with the existing technologies. So when I was introduced to the Hashgraph technical white paper, this was June of last year, in 2017, I was just blown away by what Dr. Leemon Baird, our co-founder, had created with the Hashgraph consensus algorithm. So I was very excited about the technology that they had created. I was also very impressed with the co-founders, Mance Harmon and Dr. Leemon Baird. And I decided that I wanted to be a part of their journey. And so I joined the company October of last year, moved back home to Singapore, and I run the Asia Pacific region for the company.
Awesome. I'm just curious, what was the motivation behind starting the nonprofit?
Sure. Well, this goes back to my time when I was in university. I had spent a lot of time traveling around the world, and went to a lot of developing countries, and it made me realize that being born in Singapore and getting the opportunity to go to university in the U.S., that I was quite privileged, and there were a lot of people in the world that didn't have the opportunities that I was born with. So I was motivated at that point to really do something at some point in my life to create opportunities for other people that were not born with the same opportunities that I was born with.
All right, that's quite fascinating. So moving on to Hedera Hashgraph. So as far as I understand, Hashgraph is the name of the consensus mechanism. And this consensus, right? And so this consensus mechanism is being leveraged in a permissioned or private setting by a company called Swirls. And Hedera is the public ledger.
That is correct. So Swirls, and maybe just to touch a little bit on the history of Hashgraph and how we've evolved over time. So Leemon in 2012 went to work on this problem. And by this problem, I mean distributed consensus at scale. And he wanted to build a consensus algorithm that was both secure and very specifically attained a level of security called asynchronous Byzantine fault tolerance, which is the highest level of security possible in distributed consensus. Which was achieved 30 years ago in this voting-based algorithm. But the problem with the voting-based algorithm was that it was unscalable. It took up too much bandwidth for votes to be passed over a network. And so Lehman spent years trying to come up with a solution that was ABFT, but scalable. And he went down rabbit hole after rabbit hole, and at times convinced himself that it was impossible. But then in 2015, he had a breakthrough, and the breakthrough is what we now call Hashgraph. And so he invented Hashgraph in 2015. He incorporated the company Swirls in late 2015 to commercialize Hashgraph. 2016 was spent fine-tuning the technology, also filing the patents for Hashgraph and publishing the technical white paper for the Hashgraph consensus algorithm. And then in 2017, Manson Lehman went out to pitch to enterprise clients. And it's been, since then, it's been used by various enterprise clients to build private permission ledgers. The most notable enterprise client is CU Ledger, which is the credit union consortium in the US. So there's 6,000 credit unions in the US serving over 100 million members. And they selected Hashgraph to build a series of distributed applications on top of. And in late 2017, Manson Lehman felt that they had enough market validation to think about building a public ledger on top of the Hashgraph consensus algorithm. So earlier this year in March, at an event in New York, we announced Hedera Hashgraph, which is the public ledger built on top of Hashgraph consensus.
That sounds like a good evolution of how, the consensus mechanism kind of evolved, as well as, more on the business aspect in terms of kind of starting in a more permissioned or private manner and then kind of moving it to the public or permissionless world. Could you talk a little bit more about the motivation of actually creating a public ledger in addition to a private ledger? Why not just operate in that permissioned world, and why try to make it permissionless?
Sure. Well, the way we see it is that there are going to be use cases where a private ledger is better served for, as well as certain use cases where a public ledger is better suited for as well. And so we wanted to be able to provide the technology for both of these use cases, or both types of use cases.
Okay. Could you talk a little bit about what are the kind of applications that have been running on the permission ledger? You mentioned one of the enterprise clients, which was Credit Union, which is a consortium of, essentially the Credit Union consortium, which has been running on the permission ledger. But some of the other clients that have been running, and what that experience has been like?
Yeah, sure. So, like I mentioned, the credit unions, they have and it's not just focused on payments, but they have a whole series of applications and use cases that they're building on top of Hashgraph consensus. But in addition to that, we also have a company called Intiva Health that is building a credentialing application for healthcare professionals. And yeah, their experience, they're basically selecting Hashgraph because of our properties of speed, security, and fairness. So I think this is something that may be quite important for us to dive a little bit deeper too. So the properties of Hashgraph over some of the other consensus algorithms are speed. So we're hitting cryptocurrency transactions of over 100,000 transactions per second, and that's in a single shard. I've talked about our security, which is it attains this level of security called asynchronous Byzantine fault tolerance, or ABFT, the highest level of security possible in distributed consensus. And Hashgraph also introduces for the first time in DLT the concept of fairness, and by that I mean that there's no member of the network that can affect the order of the transactions that enter into the ledger. So the combination of speed, security, and fairness allows for or introduces new use cases that just were not possible before on other blockchain technologies. When we talk about why clients are building applications, whether that's on a permission ledger or on a public ledger, these properties are the reasons why they're coming to us. So anything that can be built on blockchain can be built on Hashgraph, and we also allow for a lot of other new applications to be made possible.
Right. So I think broadly speaking, there are a few problems that exist within the public blockchain ecosystem today. You mentioned some of them. So scalability or speed, as you mentioned, is one of them. Security is one of them, or robustness of the smart contracts. Some of the other ones are kind of interoperability, privacy. One of the problems that you guys are trying to solve is that of governance. And I think that is highly, highly underrated in today's context, but it's also one of the most interesting problems that exists within the blockchain ecosystem today. So I want to kind of deep dive into the governance and how you guys are trying to solve that problem in terms of a combination of on-chain and off-chain governance. Could you elaborate in your own words how the governance mechanism works within Hedera?
Sure, and that's a great question. So maybe just to take a step back, what we're building with Hedera is a platform for the mainstream, where multinational corporations and governments will be building applications on this platform. Performance and security, as you mentioned, are critical limitations right now of why the mainstream isn't building on a public ledger, and that last piece is governance. And so what we're doing there, and we took inspiration from Visa, the credit card company. So Visa was started in the 1960s by a gentleman named Dee Hock, and he wrote a book called One from Many, detailing how he was able to put together a governance model in place to bring together a group of competing banks to build up this network. So we took inspiration from that, and what that means for us is a council of 39 of the largest, most trusted corporations from around the world. They're geo-distributed across the globe and across many industry verticals. So we're actually targeting 18 different industry verticals, so that there's no company that will be concentrated within one region or one industry. And these are best-in-class companies within their industry as well as their geography. So at this point, we have 20-something letters of intent signed by some of the largest companies in the world. And we're now in the process of converting those LOIs into signatures in the full membership agreement, and we've started to do that already. So the idea is that this governing body, the public ledger isn't owned by any one party. Swirls will be one of the 39 members, but it has no more voting power than any of the other 38 members. So the idea is to build a governance model that is capable and still distributed and decentralized.
Okay, so just diving a little bit deeper into that. So you have what is called a quote unquote a council governance, which is the 39 companies that you mentioned about. You mentioned that there are 19 companies already that have signed LOIs. Are you able to name these companies?
Not at the moment. It's actually 20-something companies, but so we can't name them at the moment. But you can expect some announcement at some point over the next few months.
Are you able to give an indication of what those companies could be? Like, are they in the, are they Fortune 500 companies or?
Oh yeah, these are Fortune 500 companies. These are brand names that everyone would have heard of. And we're talking about companies in tech, in law, in banking, in consulting, really across the globe and across many different industries.
Okay, and so the other component, and so this can be kind of classified as off-chain governance. The other sort of framework that you have as part of the governance mechanism is the on-chain governance mechanism, which you call the consensus model, which is the actual adding of transactions onto the quote-unquote blockchain, even though you guys are not technically a blockchain. Could you talk a little bit about that? Who the nodes are going to be? Would there be an overlap between these 39 companies and the nodes, or anyone can become a node? What is the expected number of nodes? Could you give a little bit of flavor in terms of like how the second aspect or second part of the governance mechanism is going to look like?
Sure, that's a great question. So initially, the platform will start out with the 39 council members as the initial nodes. But over time, as the network continues to scale, we will open it up so that basically anyone can run a node on the network. So, and longer term, we expect to have thousands, if not millions, of nodes on the network, so that it is completely distributed.
So I'm just curious. I mean, what would incentivize miners or nodes or other validators beyond these 39 council members to hold tokens or to validate transactions? Because they might not have a huge say in where the network progresses over a period of time, since they don't have that sort of quote unquote board, the 39 board seats that are present. I mean, I'm just curious if you think there's going to be an issue with attracting some of the other validators or other miners.
Yeah, we don't see any issues. We basically the nodes on the network will be compensated for contributing to consensus on the network. So the network does follow a proof of stake model, in that if you're running a node, you have to own some tokens sitting in a wallet in order to contribute to consensus. So unlike in a permission ledger where you have one node, one vote to calculate consensus, in the public ledger you need you can no longer have one node, one vote, because then someone could stand up 1,000 or 1,000,000 nodes on a network and disrupt consensus. So you need another scarce resource, and in this case, or in our case, it is the token. So it is one token, one vote on the network to calculate consensus. So going back to your question, the nodes will be compensated for contributing to consensus. And I think what we've found, as far as whether nodes want to have a say in the governance or not, what we expect that is that as you're making complex decisions for a platform, right? And this industry and this platform certainly has levels of complexity to it. It helps to have a set of expert members that are making these complex decisions for the platform, right? So that's where that's why we think that this Council of the 39 is better suited to make decisions for the platform than if the decision making was just distributed to everyone in the network. So we consider this. So we call this open consensus and permission governance.
Okay, I think that's a very fair way to put it. And I promise this is my last question on the governance aspect, and we can move on to some other topics as
No
well.
problem.
In terms of the term of these companies, or like the governance of these 39 companies itself, are they going to be sitting on sort of I mean, the way I'm picturing it in my head is like, this is sort of like, there are 39 board seats and there are 39 board members, even though there might be hierarchies within these companies, within these 39 companies. Is there going to be a certain fixed like time limit of how long you can occupy one of these 39 seats, or is it based on how much stake or how much skin in the game you have? Like, what is going to determine like who gets to sit on the, like, who are these 39 companies? Like, who's picking these 39 companies?
That's a great question. So the initial 39 will be picked by Swirls, and that's why we're in the process of recruiting this first 39. They all have they serve 3-year terms, and they can serve no more than 2 consecutive terms at a time. So they to further make sure that there's that there's not going to be collusion between the council members. These members do have to rotate out over time. So like I said, 3-year terms, no more than 2 consecutive terms, and we expect about a third of the council will turn over each year.
Okay. So I want to ask you one more tough question, which you may or may not get very often. So I get the feeling that even though that Hedera's ledger might be public, there are elements within the network which have some elements of being permissioned or private. So there's patents, there's off-chain governance limited to 39 corporations. So essentially it can be, you can call it a public blockchain because the ledger is public, but do you think that in the general sense of public blockchain, Hedera Hashgraph could be classified as a public blockchain as well?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, we are, we expect that we'll be the most decentralized platform out there, and we've already talked about the nodes on the network being able, and anyone over time being able to stand up nodes on the network. But if you look at our governance model, if you compare it to governance structures in other public ledgers, a lot of the time the decisions for the platform are made by a very small group of individuals, right? So to be able to have a governance council that's split across the globe, across many different industry verticals, that's more decentralized than many of the other platforms out there.
Okay. I think that's a very fair point. I mean, I think some of the biggest public blockchains that exist out there have, like you rightly pointed, very, very few individuals who are actually driving the directions in which these blockchains progress to. So I think that's a fair point in terms of having these corporations who are, I mean, again, one could argue that there's a lot of centralization within these corporations as well. But I think, since it's fairly globally distributed and distributed across industries, you obtain certain levels of decentralization. So I think that's a pretty fair point. What do you make of, there are certain ideological differences between people who say that code should not be patented, it should be open source. You guys are not open source, but you have good reasons to not be open source. What are your thoughts on that?
Right, that's a great question. So Hashgraph or Hedera Hashgraph will be open review. And by that, I mean, when we open up the network to the public, which is expected to be around March of next year, we will publish the entire source code on GitHub, not hiding anything. So any developers can view the source code. They can suggest changes or improvements to the source code. So Hashgraph or Hedera Hashgraph will continue to benefit from the open innovation of open source, right? But and what we're doing with the patent is we are using it as a governance tool to prevent forking of the ledger. So one thing that you can see in a lot of they've experienced forks, and when you think about the mainstream, this forking introduces instability or chaos into the public ledgers. If you are a manager at a multinational corporation thinking of launching an IoT application on a public ledger, you want to make sure that this public ledger isn't going to fork in 3 months, right? Because that introduces instability. So we are using the patent to provide stability to the platform, but at the same time, anyone can view the source code and make sure that everything works and we're not hiding anything. And that's when you think about what it takes to have a public ledger for the mainstream, stability is one critical piece of that.
Okay, that's interesting. So who would you say are your competitors in today's landscape?
Well, to be honest,
you don't have competitors, obviously.
I shouldn't say that, but we don't. For us, the Hashgraph consensus algorithm is objectively superior to the other consensus algorithms that exist in the marketplace, and I would say that for us, we care. Our focus is really on just delivering the best product we can. One of the areas that we are focusing on going forward is we realize we may have the best technology, but other platforms have because they've been around for a longer period of time, they've had deeper communities within their ecosystem. So one of the things that as we try to improve and build up our platform over time, one of the things that we're focusing on is how do we get to the types of community sizes that some of the other platforms out there have, and that's something that we're dedicating a lot of our resources to going forward.
Okay, and so again, not to put you on the spot, but like ideologically speaking, would you identify, so I think you've got things like IBM Hyperledger or the R3 Corda on one end of the spectrum, and then you have something like an Ethereum, which is trying for like sovereign grade resistance on the other end of the spectrum. Where would you say Hedera Hashgraph kind of falls on that spectrum in terms of, because I think you guys are somewhere in the middle. You guys are not aiming to, sort of be completely permissioned and be on, the Hyperledger side, but you're not also on, the Ethereum side. So, but would you say you're more closely aligned to one of these two? Which side would you fall on if you had to answer that question?
Well, can you repeat that question again? And the two sides. Can you elaborate on that a little bit?
So there's a completely permissioned side, right? Which is you've got Hyperledger built by IBM. Right. You've got Corda built by R3. And so that's one end of the spectrum where it's a completely permissioned environment. And on the other hand, you have something like Ethereum, which is aiming for sovereign grade resistance. So I don't think you guys are going for sovereign grade resistance, right? Tomorrow, if governments say that you need to kind of shut down because, and I know, and I want to speak about the KYC AML checks that you guys do as well, because you guys are trying to make sure that you're compliant. And so we can talk about that. But I think if governments tomorrow want to bring down Hedera Hashgraph, they could probably do so. And correct me if I'm wrong. But on this spectrum of like Hyperledger versus Ethereum, like which side would you lean on towards more from an ideological perspective?
I see. Well, so our focus, and we realize that we're not going to be all things to all people, but our focus is just building a platform for the mainstream, right? Where multinational corporations and governments can build applications and mission critical applications on this platform. So that is our focus. And remember, we have Swirls that continues to focus on the private permission ledger side of the industry, and Hedera is the public ledger, right? But if we're talking about specifically Hedera, then it really is, it really is just building a platform for the mainstream. Yeah. I wouldn't say that there is, there's anywhere I guess if you talk about the entire spectrum, Swirls will be on one end, and then Hedera will be on the other end of the spectrum that you described.
Yeah, that makes complete sense. So you mentioned one of the words, which was mainstream, which kind of caught my attention. So let's talk about regulatory compliance and how important it is to take this industry and this ecosystem mainstream. And so one of the things that you're trying to do is you're provisioning for KYC AML checks in the network. Could you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I think that to build a platform for the mainstream, you have to follow regulations. So we have spent a lot of time with the regulators and just making sure that we are compliant. And so these are ongoing conversations, and this is something that we pay very close attention to. As far as KYC and AML, I'll say this. In our fundraising process, which closed sometime in the middle of August, throughout our entire fundraising process, because we were following regulations, we could only raise funding from accredited investors. There were certain countries that we couldn't take money from. China was one of them, Russia was another, Vietnam was another one, Malaysia was another one. And every single investor that purchased our tokens had to go through this KYC process. I think you can expect that moving forward as a platform, we want to always stay compliant with the regulators around the world.
Okay. So let's talk about adoption a little bit. So you mentioned that you guys are going live in March of 2019 next year. You also mentioned that you have certain big partnerships or LOIs that have been signed with some of the bigger corporations. Could you give us an indication of what kind of projects are going to be built on top of your platform?
Yeah, sure. So far we have had 20-something companies that have put out press releases that they'll be launching their applications on our platform. So those are the ones I can talk quite openly about. So we have, Carbon Money. That's a stable coin. Hero FM. They are a music streaming application that will utilize micropayments, which is something that Hedera is extremely well suited for, given our throughputs. We have Mingo, that's a messaging application. We have CU Ledger, like I mentioned, the credit union consortium in the US. They are using, while they have built applications on the private permission ledger side of the business, they are also using our public ledger to settle cross-border payments with credit unions in other parts of the world. So it's really a wide variety of applications. We do have Alto is a gaming company, so they are using our ledger for transferring gaming assets. So yeah, it's a really broad range of applications.
Sounds interesting. So since you're the head of Asia, in terms of your focus on Asia, are there any particular things that you're trying to do here?
Yeah, so we have, so our mandate here in Asia encompasses a few different things. Obviously, building awareness of the platform across the different countries and languages that exist in Asia. And the other piece is bringing in more council members from the Asia Pacific region. And the third thing is really just building up our developer community across the region as well. So next week, we are running Hedera 18. Hedera 18 is our developers conference that's going to be held in Dallas. But concurrent to that, we are running 9 hackathons around the world. So in Asia, those hackathons will be in Singapore and in Bangalore. But even after Hedera 18, we expect that we'll be running hackathons throughout different countries in the APAC region.
Awesome. So before we wrap up, is there anything that you'd like to share with the audience that we may not have covered during the interview?
Yeah, no, well, first of all, I'd like to thank you for having me. For the audience, I would like to invite them to check out Hedera 18, our conference. It will be live streamed across the globe, so anyone can just go on the website and watch it. And if you are a developer, I'd love to invite you to come to participate in our hackathons.
Awesome. I'll link it up. What is the date? I'll try to, I'm not sure when exactly this podcast is going live, but I'll try to make sure that there's some sort of publicity for this hackathon on the different social media platforms, whatever I can help you guys out.
That'd be great. Yeah. The hackathon is October 15th and 16th, and the conference is on October 17th.
Okay, awesome. I think that's a good note to end the interview. Edgar, thank you very much for taking the time out to speak with us.
Thanks for having me here.
If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe to this podcast on iTunes, Google Play, SoundCloud, or wherever you listen to podcasts. Like us on Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, and Telegram, and subscribe to our newsletter on decrypt.asia. This is your host, Tushar. Thank you for listening.